Welcome to the Creating Wealth Show with Jason Hartman. You're about to learn a new slant on investing, some exciting techniques, and fresh new approaches to the world's most historically proven asset class that will enable you to create more wealth and freedom than you ever thought possible. Jason is a genuine self-made multimillionaire who's actually been there and done it. He's a successful investor, lender, developer, and entrepreneur who's owned properties in 11 states, had hundreds of tenants, and been involved in thousands of real estate transactions. This program will help you follow in Jason's footsteps on the road to your financial independence day. You really can do it. And now, here's your host, Jason Hartman, with the complete solution for real estate investors.
Welcome, investors, listeners, and financially aware people who are going to achieve big things in life. Welcome, one and all. So this is episode 1678, and we have a treat for you today. That is a live presentation from a fantastic speaker who really knows what is going on in the economy and the investment world and the macro world. So that is coming up here in just a few minutes. But first, I have to tell you that many times on the show, I have talked to you about how I do the 2-for-1 exchange and how many of our clients have done the 2-for-1 exchange or even the 3-for-1 exchange. That means a 1031 tax deferred exchange, a beautiful vehicle that Mr. Biden is trying to do away with. He may succeed. Maybe this will be my last 1031 tax deferred exchange. I hope not. Let's hope that doesn't happen, because if he takes that away, that will really change the landscape quite a bit. I don't know. It'll have a lot of impact. We don't have time to talk about that today. We'll get into it. I know many of you have asked me to talk about Biden's tax plan. I'm going to do a video on YouTube because that requires some visual aids, and so we're working on that now. And we're also working on a presentation for you on the YouTube channel about our new and totally supercalifragilisticexpialidocious economic index and housing market index. Yes, it is the CTWI. You're going to know all about it soon, and it is going to help you understand what the value of things are in the world. What is the value? How do we know what the value of anything is? Well, the CTWI is going to help with that dramatically. It is going to help humanity understand the real intrinsic value of many asset classes. So that's coming. That's coming. Watch for it on YouTube. And by the way, if you're not a subscriber, if you're not one of the over 35,000 people who has subscribed to our YouTube channel, and if you're not one of the over 500,000 people who saw my recent video on inflation, be sure you go and check that out, because you never know what will be censored. You want to see it while it's there, right? Okay, so let's go back to the tax deferred exchange topic. So typically, I will sell and I've talked to you about how I've done this many, many times. I will sell a highly appreciated property, and I will buy 2 properties in exchange, defer the taxes on a 1031 beautiful tax deferred exchange. But this time, I started an exchange, and I flip-flopped. Yes, I did. Yes, I did. And I think it's okay. You know, look, if I ever want to get into politics, and many of you have recommended that I run for public office, I'm not going to do it. Nope, not going to do it. Not worth the hassle. And certainly not worth the pay cut. Okay, so barring that, I did flip-flop a bit. And I want to tell you about my flip-flop because I think it's going to be good. I think it's going to be good. So a lot has changed in the real estate market coming out of the pandemic. And what has changed? Well, we saw the mass migration to suburbia that I believe I was the first one to predict back in mid-February of last year before anybody was talking about this. Did I get enough credit? Of course not. But, oh well, no prophet is ever revered in his own time or his own town. That's just the way the world works. Oh well. So, we had this mass migration to suburbia. We had a change in the dynamics of pricing and the market and what type of housing people wanted, what type of market segment they were looking for. It really changed quite a bit, didn't it? It sure did. So in response to that change, I changed a little bit. And I sold 4 properties in this exchange, and they're all closed. And I exchanged my 4, instead of exchanging them for 8, I did it a little different this time. I exchanged them for 2. Yes, and I am not going to be bragging to you about how my cash flow has improved. It hasn't. However, I know, ladies and gentlemen, I've always said, it's all about cash flow, blah, blah, blah. But the rent-to-value ratio ain't what it used to be with these super low interest rates. So it's not. And cash flow in a highly appreciating market where there is a mass migration to nice suburban areas, namely in Florida, many other states too, but Florida's getting a lot of attention right now, of course. But hey, Georgia, Little Rock, Arkansas, Tennessee, these markets are all booming, okay? Florida's getting a lot of attention, though, because you got all those rich New Yorkers and Connecticut folk coming down here. They've been doing that for decades, but it's been accelerated. So, what did I do? I bought only 2 properties for 4. I did the reverse. I exchanged 4 for 2, and I got more expensive properties. One was $400,000 and one was $375,000. Yeah, it's a little different than I've usually done. And I just really have faith. I mean, these properties are in nice areas. I think they're going to appreciate nicely. Florida, okay? I'm trying to undiversify and unravel the mistake I made many years ago of over-diversifying. I've talked about that many times. Wasn't the end of the world, but it also wasn't my best move. I've concentrated more. I'm still in too many markets. I always say, thou shalt diversify, meaning be in 3 to 5 markets. At least 3, not more than 5. And I'm still over-diversified, but I'm working on it, folks. Remember, some of these houses, I bought them 15, 16 years ago. And so I've done my exchange and changed it up a bit. I'll let you know how it works out. Usually, I would have purchased more inexpensive properties, but I just wanted to move up in quality a little bit and kind of just try something different. And I think it's going to work. I'll report to you as it goes to see how it goes. I haven't even done my own pro formas yet. So I'll let you know what my cash flow is looking like and everything. I think it's going to be pretty good. Rent-to-value ratios, not great. Not as good as they are on the cheaper properties. But again, with the cost of these building materials, with lumber prices going through the roof, I think we're going to have quite a bit more. And here's the key phrase. I told you this one maybe 12 years ago or 11 years ago, about 11, 12 years ago. Here it is. Remember the phrase, regression to replacement cost. Regression to replacement cost. I think there's a lot of upside potential. And yes, I'll admit it. I'm going a little bit more into the appreciation side of the equation than the cash flow side of the equation. Little bit different, not extreme. It's not like I bought super expensive properties or anything like that. I didn't buy them in crazy cyclical markets. I still like linear markets, maybe a little bit, kind of everything's becoming a little bit hybrid right now, isn't it? Yes, it is. Cyclical, linear, hybrid markets. Almost everything is becoming a bit hybrid. That won't last forever. These are overall linear markets. So that's my story. And I'm going to tell you more about it. I just had to share it with you because I did these deals over the weekend, and it's different. I haven't done this exchange in this direction before. So I'll let you know how it works. Okay, without further ado, let's get to the live presentation. I hope you enjoy it. And if you need us, of course, reach out, 1-800-HARTMAN in the United States and around the world, jasonhartman.com. All right, here is Part 2, as we talk about macroeconomics, inflation, and by the way, have you seen all this inflation around us? Have you been to the grocery store lately? Have you gone to the doctor lately? I mean, they can't hide the inflation any longer. We all know that the jig is up on the inflation. Some are saying that real inflation right now, for most people, is 10 to 12%. 10 to 12% real inflation by some estimates right now. We'll see. What do you think? Let me know at jasonhartman.com/ask. jasonhartman.com/ask. We always love to hear your questions, your comments. By the way, a lot of those questions and comments, we don't always get to them on the podcast, but we do get to them a lot of times on the live streams that you can watch on the YouTube channel and any one of several of our Facebook pages. So find those, check out the live streams, kind of a different format, different vibe. I did it myself on Wednesday. Adam does it with me a lot. So be sure to check out those live streams on the YouTube channel, and be sure to subscribe on the YouTube channel and join the over 35,000 other people who subscribe, and check out that main video I posted at the top of the YouTube channel with over 500,000 people that have watched that now on inflation, just so you'll gain a better and continued understanding of this very important topic. Okay, I know, I keep rambling. We got to get to the live presentation. So here we go. Let's listen in from the beautiful Fontainebleau Resort in Miami, Florida. Here it is. We've got to understand inflation for most people is the insidious hidden tax that destroys the value of their savings, their stocks, their bonds, and their equity in real estate. And thankfully, it destroys the value of their debt. And that is the beautiful, beautiful hidden wealth creator that income property uses better than any other asset class. Let's talk a little bit about economics and money and the real estate market. It's quite a bit of switching gears from some of the variety of topics and the stuff we've talked about tonight and over the last few days. So first of all, just kind of an update on what's going on. As you all know, how many of you are in real estate, by the way? Most people I'm talking to, it seems like it's just the default thing because, as I've always said, income property is the most historically proven asset class in the world. It is the most tax-favored asset class in America, and taxes are the single largest expense in any of our lives. It is vitally important. It is everything almost because we engage with it, we live in it. It's just such a part of our lives. And it is a fantastic asset class, of course. So looking at pending home sales, they are through the roof. I mean, pending home sales up 32% from a year earlier. This will probably come as no surprise to anybody. In my company, basically what we do is we help people buy properties nationwide. We help them invest in remote areas that aren't necessarily where they live. And if we had 3 times the number of properties, we would have 3 times the number of sales. There is literally no property that goes unsold anymore. Years ago, that was different, but today, everything sells. And a lot more would sell if we had it to sell, if we had that inventory. This won't surprise you either. Home sales price is up 15%, another new high, so nothing here will surprise you. But One of the things I like to talk about is a concept. I like to try and look at things differently. I like to talk about a concept I call packaged commodities investing or assembled commodities investing. And when we buy a property, whether it be a single-family home or an apartment complex or whatever it is, what we really need to remember is that we are buying this. What is this? Well, this is a wall and a ceiling, and what are they made of? This is lumber, it's petroleum products, it's glass, it's steel, it's concrete, it's energy, it's labor, it's all of these commodities. Now, what's interesting about this is these commodities, of course, are traded worldwide on commodities exchanges. But when you get them packaged in the form of a property, it becomes a whole different asset class. And with that asset class, you get a whole bunch of very special privileges that you don't get when you buy commodities on the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, for example. Okay? When you buy coffee beans or lumber or soybeans or whatever commodity it might, orange juice, whatever commodity it is, you don't get these special privileges that you get when it's packaged in the form of a property. So it's a very, very special asset class in so many ways. So you look at lumber prices. One of our clients works in the lumber industry. I had him on my podcast recently. He sends me the internal newsletters he gets for the lumber industry. They have a newsletter called Random Lengths, like the length of the lumber, I guess. And the prices of lumber are just skyrocketing. And this is a huge component to housing costs, right? Of course it is. And so during the time of the biggest lockdowns and quarantines, we saw the lumber mills close, the prices skyrocket dramatically because there was a huge supply shortage. And then it started to adjust as they reopened and sort of retooled to the new game, the new era in which we live. Prices fell off just a little bit, but still very, very high. There is massive, massive demand for housing and all of the packaged commodities that are part of a house, all of those ingredients that make that house, right? So very important to think about that. And then the other big trend is, I don't know about you, maybe you read it, maybe you didn't, but John Steinbeck wrote a great novel many years ago called The Grapes of Wrath. And I read that in 10th grade. It was one of our assignments. He talked about this mass migration during the Dust Bowl and how everybody moved west. There's this mass migration going on, and I identified this way back in about mid-February, which in COVID years is like dog years. That's like 7 years ago, right? And I noticed what was happening, of course, in Wuhan, as we all did, and then in Italy. And I thought, I've been a lot of places. I've been to Italy many times. It's a high-density environment. Wuhan is a high-density environment. So way back then, I was the first person, at least that I heard, saying it, talking about it publicly on my podcast, on my YouTube channel, that there was going to be this mass migration to lower density environments. For the past several decades, the migration has been toward the city, toward higher density environments. And with the fear of contagion, the two biggest concern areas for contagion would be elevators and mass transit. Those two, right? People will want to get away from these type of environments. And by golly, as soon as we had those first restrictions lifting and people got out of their house, they started moving in mass. This is a mass migration. Probably the biggest migration movement, maybe since the Grapes of Wrath era. With that migration comes a big transfer of wealth. Okay, a big transfer of wealth. Wealth is moving around. The chips are moving around, and what I hope to impart to you is some ways that you can take advantage of that movement. And by the way, that sounds kind of weird, right? Take advantage of that movement of wealth. Well, it's not really take advantage of it because capitalism is such a wonderful thing and allocates resources so efficiently compared to any other system human beings have ever tried, ever. Okay? Forget about whatever Bernie Sanders might say. It doesn't work, okay? Capitalism works. Capitalists, like all of us, right? They go in and they find need and fill it. And they supply the need, they satisfy demand. And that's what we as real estate investors do. is we satisfy that demand in these areas, and there's this mass migration to suburbia. So that's a big part of that wealth transfer. If you want to do your own research on this, I just did this myself, just go to a website you may have heard of, uhaul.com. And this one I did, I live in Palm Beach, Florida, about an hour and a half north of here. I know that people are leaving New York City, so I punched in that I wanted to pick up a truck in New York City, and I wanted to drive a truck one way to Palm Beach, Florida. And guess what? To do that, leaving New York, the bottom one, that truck is $3,400, okay? For a one-way truck, no driver, just, rent the truck. But if you want to take that truck back exactly the other direction, it's a third less. It's only $2,100. What does that tell us? It tells us that the supply-demand equation is very imbalanced because U-Haul is having trouble getting its trucks back to New York as everybody is fleeing New York, right? And there are even more pronounced examples of this. One of our clients did it because they were leaving the Socialist Republic of California, my former home state, and they are moving to Boise, Idaho. They did the U-Haul thing themselves and then shared that in a private social network that I have for our investors. And it was even more pronounced than this one. So you can do your own research with that and just see where things are going. Years ago, I interviewed a really interesting lady, Meredith Whitney, on my podcast. She's a Wall Street person, but she wrote this great book called The Fate of the States, The New Geography of American Prosperity. And I interviewed her maybe 6-7 years ago. It talked about how there was this migration where people were voting with their feet and moving to business-friendly areas with lower taxes, less government intrusion, less government intervention. And this trend, we've all seen it. It's not a surprise to any of us. But now you combine that with the COVID trend where people are leaving big cities that tend to be left-wing, business-unfriendly, high-tax, high-cost environments, and they're moving to suburban areas and even rural areas in many cases. And it is a big deal. It is a big wealth transfer, possibly the biggest wealth transfer in American history is upon us right now, okay? So get there and supply some of this need. People have needs, you can fill them, okay? So leaving California, was it something we taxed? Instead of I love New York, it's I leave New York, right? There used to be a heart there. Remember that famous logo? And this just shows, where people are moving to as they're leaving New York and California. And it has massively, massively accelerated a trend that was already in place. Now, I'm an economist. I don't have formal economics training too much. I took macroeconomics in college, big deal. I don't have a degree in it, okay? But my favorite economist is a guy named Joseph Schumpeter. Why? Joseph Schumpeter coined, or at least popularized, I'm not sure, a phrase that is a really important phrase to think about because it's happening all around us all the time, and it is a beautiful thing. The phrase is this, write it down. Creative destruction. Creative destruction. And what Schumpeter meant by this creative destruction concept, was that old businesses that don't work, that are maybe on life support, should be destroyed creatively as entrepreneurs come in and fill that void with a new business that serves the marketplace better. And capitalism is extremely efficient at creative destruction as long as the government gets out of the way and stops picking winners and losers and lets businesses fail. They need to fail so something new can grow. Okay, whenever there's a forest fire or this kind of thing we think of as a disaster, a destructive force, what does it do? It creates a lot of opportunity for new growth. And this constant reinvention is something that definitely needs to happen. And it's part of capitalism, it's part of the marketplace, and it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. Now let's talk about money creation. This last year, 2020, has been the most amazing year for the printing press. Okay? They call it money printing, but it's not really even printed anymore. the Federal Reserve and other central banks around the world in this unholy alliance with the Treasury and the governments, they create money out of thin air. And it's called fiat money. Fiat just means by authority or by decree. It has value because we said so. So if you think about it, and you take a $20 bill out of your wallet, for example, and you think, well, what is that called? Well, duh, it's a $20 bill. Well, what was it called in 1970? It was also called a $20 bill back then. It has the same name, but it has a different value, right? Because of inflation. And the more money you create, the more you put into the world, the more that money chases a limited supply of goods and services. And just by the basic law of economics, supply and demand, people raise prices as more money is chasing their goods and services, right? This is simple stuff. But the amount of money creation that has occurred last year is nothing short of staggering by any possible measure you could think of. It is absolutely mind-boggling. We thought it was mind-boggling back in 2008, around there during the Great Recession. It is beyond mind-boggling now. It's absolutely beyond mind-boggling. And so, this kind of chart, what's really interesting about this chart is where it goes straight up and, it ends, because that's basically now or just the last few months. So a lot of economists will say really silly things like, well, they created all this money during the Great Recession and we didn't have inflation. That's just not true. Now, it's not true on the sort of apparent or simple level, meaning that we didn't have inflation in terms of anything wild. We didn't see Zimbabwe, Venezuela, any kind of crazy inflation. Maybe not even as bad as the 1970s in the United States, or Hungary, or any of these other big inflation cases. But the problem is they rarely ask the question, and my listeners have dubbed this, and some of you listen to my podcast, I know, they've dubbed this the Jason Hartman question. Anyone know what it is? Compared to what? Right? Compared to what? That's always the question for everything in life. Everything in life is compared to what? Okay? If you're having an argument with your spouse and they say, well, you don't treat me well enough, just say compared to what? See how that goes over? It won't be good. But it should always be the question, compared to what? That is the question, right? See, how much lower would prices have been now if they didn't print all that money 12, 13 years ago? And so there's this war going on. And the war is between two opposing forces. And this is the big war in standard of living, in your lifestyle, in economics, and in the inflation-deflation debate. Because those are the two basic economic maladies, inflation and deflation. Here's the war. The war is between, on one hand, over in this corner, we have technology. And over in this corner, we have very bad fiscal and monetary policy. Who wins the war? Is it the deflationary aspect of technology? Because technology makes things cheaper. They always get cheaper and better, right? That iPhone sitting there, it is dramatically better than the first cell phone I got that costs $3,200 and weighed 14 pounds. And I bought it at Radio Shack and I literally financed it. Radio Shack had financing, right? So I was just a kid. I bought a cell phone, for $3,200. And now that cell phone is dramatically better. And it's cheaper too. And everyone's complaining, $1,500 for an iPhone, that's too much. I'm thinking, that's cheap to me. Okay, I thought it was kind of cheap. So I bought one. And so that's the war. We have fiscal and monetary policy. So monetary policy is what central banks do. They print money, right? That's our central bank is the Federal Reserve. In Europe, it's the European Central Bank or the ECB, or in Japan, it's the Bank of Japan. They control monetary policy. But the government controls fiscal policy. And fiscal policy is Congress. It's taxing and spending. It's the House Ways and Means Committee, mostly. And so the government likes to spend money because politicians like to dole out goodies to get votes, right? They like to buy votes. Hugo Chavez did it in Venezuela. They all do it. It's just the way it works. And so who's going to win? Is it going to be creating tons of fake money out of thin air, and that's inflationary, or is it going to be the deflationary force of progress? So there are three basic ways in terms of measuring inflation that are so important for us to understand, to really know what's going on. The government has a huge incentive to mislead us on the issue of inflation for multiple reasons. One, they want us to think things are better than they really are. Okay, that's the first one. It's kind of obvious. But also, all of the government entitlement programs and salaries are indexed to inflation. So if the consumer price index, the most popular measure for inflation, looks lower than it really is, and they say inflation is only 2% when it's really 5 or 6%, then we all kind of feel better, and the government doesn't have to spend as much, and it's, all good, right? But what they do is they do three things. They use weighting, hedonics, and substitution to make us think that there's less inflation than there really is. Okay, and we'll get to that in a moment. I hope I'm going to have time to show you a short video on that because it's fascinating. So this money printing is a huge, huge problem. There's another measure, M2, in terms of money printing, and there's more. I won't bore you with all these graphs. They're in your book, okay? And so there's more on the money creation. You all know it's true. You all know it's happening. You watch the news, right? Now, this is just a quick video. This is Tricky Dicky Nixon, for those of you who are too young to know. And this happened in 1971, and here's what he said.
The third indispensable element in building the new prosperity is closely related to creating new jobs and halting inflation. We must protect the position of the American dollar as a pillar of monetary stability around the world. In the past 7 years, there's been an average of one international monetary crisis every year. Now, who gains from these crises? Not the working man, not the investor, not the real producers of wealth. The gainers are the international money speculators. Because they thrive on crises, they help to create them. In recent weeks, the speculators have been waging an all-out war on the American dollar. The strength of a nation's currency is based on the strength of that nation's economy. And the American economy is by far the strongest in the world. Accordingly, I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to take the action necessary to defend the dollar against the speculators. I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability.
So that statement changed the world. When Nixon did the final thing to close the gold window and take us off any connection to gold, the spending went absolutely crazy right after that. And guess what else happened? Housing prices went through the roof. A lot of inflation happened. There were lines at the gas stations that were 3 hours long. You could only get your gas on odd and even days, depending on your license plate number, and all kinds of crazy stuff, right? Are we here again? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. But let me give you some food for thought. What I always tell people on my podcast is that we can't change this. We can complain about it, we can philosophize, and we can say it's wrong. And all the stuff the governments and the central banks do, it's definitely wrong. It's not even moral. It's immoral in so many ways and has so much impact on so many areas of life, including art and innovation. Since we can't change it, we simply need to align our interests with the two most powerful forces the world has ever known: governments and central banks. Governments have standing armies, they have aircraft carriers, they have police forces, and they basically do the bidding and they're in collusion with the central banks. We're not going to fix it. We can only try to do what they're doing so we benefit from it the same way they benefit from it. So think about it. If you're the United States and you owe China, let's round it off and call it $1 trillion, okay? And if you inflate your currency so it becomes less valuable by printing more of it, the value of that debt goes down in real terms. Okay, so if there's 10% inflation, you just knock $100 billion off your debt. Poof, it's magic. It's the greatest thing ever. So how can we use that? Okay, how can we use that? My second favorite economist is a guy named Richard Cantillon. I don't know if he coined it, but someone that came after him coined the idea of what's called the Cantillon effect. And the Cantillon effect meant this. It meant that the people closest to the money printing benefit the most. That seems pretty simple. So if you're a bankster and there's more money being printed, you're going to benefit the most because you're going to be near the faucet. And as that money flows out of that faucet, you're going to get a bigger share than the person working for minimum wage at the other end of the economic spectrum. If you're a Wall Street crook, you're going to get the bigger part of the spigot, right? If you're a government politician, how did Nancy Pelosi ever get so rich? How did Bernie Sanders get 3 homes? He's the common man. I don't know. It's just crazy. All these politicians, they go into Congress with very little, and, after several years they're somehow rich. I don't get it. It's Cantillon effect, right? It must be great. So this is going to happen. It is happening. It's going to happen more and more, and it's going to get more pronounced. There's going to be more and more inflation. So I've identified 6 ways the U.S. government can get out of the mess of having all of this unfunded entitlements, all of these welfare programs it simply cannot afford, all of these government programs it can't afford. What does it do to solve its problem? What does the government do to solve its problem? And how can we align our interests with the government and the central banks? Well, number 1, it could just default on the debt. It could say, hey, sorry, I know we promised you Social Security. I know we promised you Medicare. I know we promised you Obamacare, but we just can't afford it. Sorry, too bad. Very politically unpopular, very unlikely. You might remember several years ago in Greece and also in many countries in Europe, they had riots and all kinds of unrest over austerity measures, right? That's the default. So that's very unlikely. They could raise taxes, right? Just tax the rich, okay, and make them pay more. Well, they're certainly trying to do that, and there are a lot of examples of that. But the rich don't have enough money to solve the problem. If they tax the rich at 150%, there's not enough to solve the problem. The problem has become so big, it cannot be solved through taxes anymore. It could a long time ago, but not anymore. How about have a yard sale? Maybe we could sell our ports to Dubai. Maybe we could sell military fighter jets to Libya and do all kinds of things we shouldn't do that might not be the most prudent things, right? The Bureau of Land Management, not the other BLM, okay, sells off land all the time to developers, toll roads owned by Chinese companies, right? All of this kind of stuff, right? So we could do that to raise money. We could also steal. We could use our military, and we could go in and just take resources of other countries. And people have accused us of that, although, we didn't do a very good job of it, if that was the plan. Here's a good one. Technological innovation. Maybe we'll have biotech breakthroughs, energy breakthroughs. Maybe they'll be America-centric, and money will flow into the country, and the country will become fabulously rich and pay off all these unfunded mandates. But the most likely plan is this: inflation. It's a great business plan for governments and central banks. It is the best plan because, again, it's that example I told you: $1 trillion owed to China, 10% inflation, poof, $100 billion in debt just magically disappears in real terms. So that is the business plan that I say is going to happen more and more so. It's already been happening for decades, but it is going to increase dramatically. How can we benefit from it? Well, we've got to understand inflation really, really well. It's a big deal. I know it's talked about, and people like to oversimplify it, and they say, well, prices are rising, so there's inflation. Well, there's a little more to it than that. So we got to understand the difference between the real value of something, and the nominal value. Nominal just means in name only. It's just the name of something, like that $20 bill we talked about a few minutes ago. That's the name of it, the difference between price and value. We've got to understand inflation for most people is the insidious hidden tax that destroys the value of their savings, their stocks, their bonds, and their equity in real estate. And thankfully, it destroys the value of their debt. And that is the beautiful, beautiful hidden wealth creator that income property uses better than any other asset class. Inflation is the most powerful method of wealth redistribution, It's not taxation, it's inflation. It's much more powerful. Many years ago, I had Joe the plumber on my show. You remember him back from 2008? So he walked up to Obama and kind of, rudely said to Obama, "You're going to redistribute my wealth." He was talking about taxation. But that's not very powerful. It's too obvious. Everybody notices it. Inflation is much more subtle and much more powerful. But inflation redistributes wealth from lenders to borrowers. Because if I borrow $1 million in mortgages, and we have over the course of 1 year or 3 years, doesn't matter, we just have it. If we have 10% inflation, then $100,000 is paid off for free just by inflation. It's the beautiful hidden wealth creator. Everybody thinks they're making money in real estate because they buy low and sell high. That's for amateurs. It's all right, okay, I'll take it. But it's not the most powerful thing. The most powerful thing is something I call inflation-induced debt destruction. This will be continued on the next episode. Thank you for listening and happy investing. Thank you so much for listening. Please be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any episodes. Be sure to check out the show's specific website and our general website, hartmanmedia.com, for appropriate disclaimers and terms of service. Remember that guest opinions are their own, and if you require specific legal or tax advice or advice in any other specialized area, please consult an appropriate professional. And we also very much appreciate you reviewing the show. Please go to iTunes or Stitcher Radio or whatever platform you're using and write a review for the show. We would very much appreciate that. And be sure to make it official and subscribe so you do not miss any episodes. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode.